Welcome back to Armchair Italy, the podcast where we unpack the history, the myths, and the beautiful chaos of the Italian peninsula. I'm your host, Anthony Capizzoli, and today we're diving back into our favorite recurring segment, There Is No Such Thing as Italian Food. Now, if you've ever been to Italy, you know that what we call Italian food is actually a collection of hyper-regional culinary traditions, and nothing proves this fiercely independent, grudge-holding food culture quite like the humble loaf of bread. Imagine you're sitting in a gorgeous piazza in Florence. The waiter brings out a basket of beautiful rustic bread. You tear off a piece, take a big bite, and it tastes bland. But wait! It's not bland. It's perfect. It will change the way you view bread and culinary traditions from this moment forward. It is the exclamation point on my series. There is no such thing as Italian food. The great saltless mystery. Visually, it's gorgeous. It features a thick, crunchy, golden crust and a soft, springy white interior crumb filled with irregular air holes. But because it lacks salt, eating it entirely on its own tastes bland, even unappetizing at first. That is, until you no longer have it on your table. However, I now love it as much as the great Dante Alighieri, who writes, Tu proverai sì come sa di sale, lo pane altrui e come duro cale, lo scendere e salire più altrui scale, which means, you shall learn how salt is the taste of another man's bread, how hard the path descending and climbing another man's stairs. The great Dante wrote these magnificent lines in the Paradiso when he was discussing how hard it was living in exile from his beloved Florence. And what does he miss the most? His bread. So, why would the Tuscans, who are culturally obsessed with food, purposely make bland bread? Its neutrality in flavor is entirely intentional. Pane Toscano serves as the ultimate functional tool to balance and soak up the intensely rich, salty flavors of regional Tuscan cuisine. But the reason they stopped putting salt in the bread in the first place, well, that comes down to a classic, centuries-old Italian political drama worthy of Machiavelli. Medieval grudges and baker protests. The lack of salt stems all the way back to 12th century political rivalries. There are a few theories on how this happened. First, the Pisan blockade. According to legend, the coastal Republic of Pisa halted all salt trade moving inland to Florence during a bitter dispute. Heavy taxation. Other historical records note that salt was heavily taxed during the Middle Ages, making it a luxury product. And then finally, the bakers' protest. Rather than submit to high prices in terms of taxation or enemy control from Pisa, Florentine bakers simply omitted salt. And to make up for it, they adjusted their food to be much richer and saltier to compensate, creating a culinary tradition that remains unchanged today. Talk about historical petty brilliance. Let's dive into the Pisan blockade. If you want to understand just how petty medieval Italian politics could get, you don't have to look at old battlefields, you just have to look at a Florentine bakery window. The Pisan blockade is the ultimate historical example of cutting off your nose to spite your face. And it perfectly encapsulates the cutthroat rivalry the city-states of Florence and Pisa had. The logistics of the feud. To understand how Pisa pulled this off, you have to look at the geography of Tuscany. Florence is a magnificently landlocked city, but it relies heavily on the Arno River to move goods from the Mediterranean coast inland. And who sat right at the mouth of the Arno, controlling the access point to the sea? Pisa. In the 12th century, Pisa was a dominant maritime republic, wealthy, powerful, and fiercely territorial. Florence was an aggressive, expanding economic powerhouse, the Medici and so on. They naturally despised each other. Salt was not just something you shook onto a plate, it was the medieval equivalent of refrigeration, absolutely vital for preserving meats, fish, cheese, and Pisa knew this. So, during one of their endless spats, Pisa decided to hit Florence where it hurt. They established a naval embargo on the Arno, blocking all salt shipments heading upriver to Florentine territory. Alternatively, some accounts say they didn't cut it off completely, but rather imposed astronomical transit taxes on the salt passing through their docks to squeeze Florence financially. The Florentine response: keep the salt. The Pisans expected Florence to come crawling to the negotiating table, begging for their salt back. Instead, they vastly underestimated Florentine stubbornness. The Florentine government and its powerful bakers' guilds essentially said, fine, we will just stop using salt. They refused to pay the Pisan tax or submit to the blockade. Bakers adjusted their daily recipes, removing salt from the dough entirely, but continuing to bake their massive loaves of bread. To make the situation work, Florentine chefs simply started heavily salting and peppering their prosciutto, wild boar stews, local cheeses. The bread became, in essence, an edible plate designed to absorb the flavors of the rest of the meal. Florence effectively weaponized culinary blandness as a symbol of political resistance. Now let's talk about facts versus myth. First of all, Dante. In Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in the early 14th century, he famously wrote, which I mentioned, about his exile from Florence, warning that he will learn how salty the bread is of others. This proves that Florentine bread was already notoriously saltless long before the major 15th century wars between Florence and Pisa. The taxman. This is a much more likely scenario, but less romantic, because who doesn't love Dante? Truth is that salt was heavily taxed by the Florentine government itself to fund their expensive wars. The local peasants, outraged, were simply too broke to buy tax salt for everyday baking, so they saved what little they had for preserving pork and other foods. They just didn't use it in their bread. The geography problem. If it was just a Florentine boycott against Pisa, why is the bread saltless across the entire region of Tuscany and in parts of Umbria, even in towns that weren't involved in the feud? Ultimately, whether it was caused by a Pisan embargo or local tax evasion, the result is beautifully ironic. Centuries after the Republic of Pisa and the Republic of Florence ceased to exist, Tuscans still refuse to put salt in their dough to this day. It is a centuries-old habit born out of spite, and there is nothing more regional than that. So let's talk about how it's made and why it looks so amazing. Authentic Pane Toscano, DOP, which is the way that the Italians certify their foods to be authentic and regionally specific. Denominazione origine protetta, I believe, DOP, Denominazione origine protetta. Dispiace. Anyway, it requires very simple ingredients and quite a bit of patience. First, the biga. Bakers begin the night before by mixing flour, water, and a tiny amount of yeast to form a starter pre-ferment called biga. Roughly a 2-to-1 flour to water ratio and a pinch of yeast, compared to a 1-to-1 flour to water ratio and a pinch of yeast for pouliche that we see in French baking for baguettes. Biga is considered a stiff starter and a little bit tougher to work with. Not difficult, but just has a little bit of a more dense feel versus a much more elastic, easy to handle, easy to manage pouliche, the flour. Traditional Tuscan bread requires local Tuscan wheat flour, which yields a unique toasted hazelnut aroma. However, I've used and do use other high-protein bread flours, and it turns out great. It's not DOP, but I have to use what I can get my hands on without paying a ridiculous amount in shipping to get flour from Tuscany shipped to my home in the U.S. Now the rise. Without salt to slow it down, the yeast proves efficiently, quickly even, developing a highly porous crumb and structure very quickly. This also means it's susceptible to falling or overproofing if you're not careful. So you have to keep an eye on it while bulk proofing. And if you need to slow it down, you can put it in the refrigerator, which I very often do to maintain its structure. Plus, it helps create more flavor through a little bit longer ferment. The baking. Dough is hand-shaped and baked in massive wood-fired ovens. The crust turns a deep golden brown, but without the standard caramelization due to the missing salt. So it's got an interesting color. At home, I'm sans massive wood-fired oven, so I used cast iron Dutch ovens. They trap the moisture incredibly well, create a wonderful crust worthy of the Tuscans, and allow for a wonderful oven spring. When you buy Tuscan bread, it comes in three main shapes. The bozza, which is a classic round loaf. The filone, which is an elongated, wide, oval-shaped loaf. And then the ciabatta, which I have to admit, if I'm buying Tuscan bread, I'm either buying the bozza or more traditionally the filone. This is the core of cucina povera. In Tuscany, stale bread is never thrown away. It acts as a core ingredient in cucina povera, which is peasant cooking, peasant kitchen, the poor kitchen. Because it has a thick crust, it stays usable for days and holds its texture perfectly. Tuscans even weaponized this bland bread to create some of the most iconic dishes, I think, in the whole of Italy. And specifically in the region of Tuscany, you can find magical food. First, ribollita, twice boiled soup. It's a thick, hearty winter soup made from reboiled, leftover white beans, kale, vegetables, and stale bread. Papa al pomodoro, rich, comforting tomato soup, but very thick stew-like, cooked down with stale bread, fresh tomatoes, garlic, and plenty of Tuscan olive oil. Panzanella, refreshing summer salad composed of rehydrated stale bread cubes tossed with ripe tomatoes, onions, cucumbers, basil, vinegar, and olive oil. He is the soak. This is the perfect summer dish and a perfect way to use days-old bread. Check out my video on this, by the way, on Instagram at Armchair Italy. There's links all over armchairitaly.com. Fettunta. This is one of those dishes that will forever remain etched in your memory. It's simply grilled slices of fresh or day-old bread, rubbed with raw garlic, drenched in freshly pressed olive oil. I do add a little bit of salt. I don't know if it's traditional or not, but I like a touch of salt and a touch of black pepper. It is one of the most authentic, humble snacks of all time. In my opinion, it's the true meaning of cucina povera. Waste nothing, use everything, make it awesome, but keep it basic. I make all of these dishes at home all the time. And then finally, scarpetta, which is deeply ingrained Italian ritual of using a piece of bread to cleanly wipe up all the leftover sauce and stews and anything, quite frankly, left on your plate. This is not restricted just to Pane Toscano, by the way, or is it? It's certainly not restricted to Tuscany. This happens all over Italy, but the Tuscan breads are wonderful for this because it pairs so perfectly well with the dishes from the particular region. And I think that's pretty much true of any bread throughout anywhere in Italy. Now, the bread divide. Proving the thesis. Prove my point that there is no such thing as Italian food. You only have to look across regional borders. While Tuscany is eating saltless bread, other regions are doing the exact opposite. So let's cover a few. So this particular bread is from Tuscany, and I never say this right the first time, so bear with me. Schiacciata. Did I do it? Schiacciata. See. It's a flatbread baked with a lot of olive oil and topped with flaked salt. It's a wonderful choice, very regional, amazing for sandwiches, and think of a flatter, crispier focaccia. It's one of those things which you can just cruise around the streets of Florence. You can walk into a bakery and grab a slice of this, and it's a wonderful experience. It very often has rosemary on it. Phenomenal. Pane di Altamura. It's from Apulia. This is made from local durum wheat, semolina. It has a thick, dark crust that preserves the bread for weeks. This is the bread that, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but families from the village have their dough, they walk it down to the baker, they have their own personal family stamp that goes on the bread. The baker bakes the bread in the baker's oven, and then the families come after the bread is cooled to pick it up and bring it home, if they don't feel like buying the bread directly from the baker. Either way is amazing. But this particular bread has a recognizable, almost pompadour look to it. It has, if you could think of like Elvis Presley's hair, the pompadour, it has a layer on the top that kind of folds back. It is really cool. Getting it local is the best way to do it. I have made it before. It is not the same thing. It will never be as good as getting your hands on some amazing bread, Altamura, from Puglia, and made locally by the bakers who have been doing it for centuries. This particular bread, Altamura, was praised by the Roman poet Horace in 37 BC as the best bread in the world. It is the first bread in Europe to receive protected DOP status. Piadina Romagnola. It's from Emilia-Romagna. It's a thin, flaky, unleavened flatbread that relies on lard, strutto, rather than olive oil for a rich flavor. Think of an Italian pita with a little bit deeper, a richer flavor profile. Now, I love a pita, but it has a different flavor profile than piadina because of the fat. Pane Toscano from Sardinia. Paper-thin, brittle sheets of double-baked flatbread. Invented for shepherds. It crackles loudly when eaten. Think of like bread and a cracker mix. But the cool thing about them, when they cook them in the oven, they puff up like little pufferfish or big pufferfish. When they come out of the oven and they deflate, and they're split in two very often. So you have, it creates one loaf, they split that piece in two and you eat each side of it independently. Phenomenal. And then the ciabatta from the Veneto. It created in 1982 to compete with all the great things that the world knows about French baguettes. It's extremely hydrated, has a very airy interior, a tougher crumb sometimes, I think. I like it. It's very difficult to make. It's a very finicky dough because it's so hydrated. I just always prefer to buy ciabatta versus make it myself, but I'm learning and maybe that will change down the road. And then finally focaccia from Liguria or Puglia. It's also made all throughout Italy now as well, but those are the two destinations I think that focaccia is most known for. A light, fluffy, delicious bread made with olive oil, salt, high hydration, and then topped with nearly anything, but my particular traditional favorites. I love tomato oregano. I also love a traditional salt and olive oil, largely from Genoa or Liguria, and then the Puglian version with whole cherry tomatoes and olives. Phenomenal. I think onions also, forgive me. So, the next time someone asks you to pass the bread, ask them, do they want paper-thin sheets from Sardinia, lard-infused flatbread from Emilia-Romagna, or salt-free from Tuscany? Because in Italy, bread isn't just food. It's a regional declaration of independence proving there is no such thing as Italian food. Be on the lookout for my videos of me making Pane Toscano. And don't forget, there's currently a video of me making a tasty panzanella salad on my socials. Find all the links at armchairitaly.com. Thanks for sitting in the armchair with me today, and until next time, buon appetit.